Hello again, boys and girls. I hope you're ready. I hope you're comfortable. I hope you're listening and that you're going to enjoy the next part of the BFG. So here we go. The great plan. We've absolutely got to stop them, Sophie cried. Put me back in your pocket quick and we'll chase after them and warn everybody in England they're coming. Redunculous and impossible, the BFG said. They's going 2 times as fast as me and they's finishing their guzzle before we's even halfway. Oh, but we can't just sit here and do nothing, Sophie cried. How many girls and boys are they going to eat tonight? Many, the BFG said. The flesh lump eating joint alone has a most squackling wopsy appetite. Will he snatch them out of their beds whilst they're sleeping? Like peas out of a poddle, the BFG said. Oh, I can't bear to think of it, Sophie cried. Then don't, the BFG said. For years and years I's sitting here on this very rock every night after night when they's galloping away, and I's feeling so sad for all the human beings they is going to gobble up. But I has had to get used to it. There is nothing I can do. If I wasn't a titchy little runty giant, only 24 feet high, then I would be stopping them. But that's absolutely out of the window. Do you always know where they're going? Sophie asked. Always, the BFG said. Every night they's yelling at me where there's bootling past. The other day they was yelling, "Whiz off to Mississippi and Miss Zori to guzzle them both." Disgusting, Sophie said. I hate them. She and the big friendly giant sat quietly side by side on the blue rock in the gathering dusk. Sophie had never felt so helpless in her life. After a while, she stood up and cried out, I can't stand it! Just think of those poor girls and boys who are going to be eaten alive in a few hours' time. We can't just sit here and do nothing. We've got to go after those brutes. No, said the BFG. We must, Sophie cried. Why won't you go? The BFG sighed and shook his head firmly. I has told you 5 or 6 times, he said, and the 3rd won't be the last. I is never showing myself to human beings. Well, why ever not? Well, if I do, they's put me in the zoo with all the jiggy rafts and caterpillars. Nonsense, Sophie said. And they will be sending you straight back to that orphanage, the BFG went on. Grown-up human beings is not famous for their kindness. They is all squiffalotterers and grink-sludgers. That simply isn't true, Sophie cried angrily. Some of them are very kind indeed. Who? The BFG said. You name one. The Queen of England? Sophie said. You can't call her a squiffle-trotter or a wrinkle-sludger. Well, the BFG said. You can't call her a squick-peep or a knot-muncher either, Sophie said, getting angrier and angrier. The flesh lump eater is longing dearly to guzzle her up, the BFG said, smiling a little now. Who? The Queen? Sophie cried aghast. Yes, the BFG answered. Flesh lump eater says he has never eaten a queen, and he thinks perhaps she has an especially scrum-diddly-umptious flavour. How dare he? Sophie cried. But Flesh lump eater says there is too many soldiers around her palace, and he dursn't dare try it. He'd better not, Sophie said. He's also saying he would like very much to guzzle one of the soldiers in his pretty red suit, but he's worried a bit about that big furry hat that he's wearing. He thinks it might get stickling in his throat. Oh, I hope he chokes, Sophie said. Flesh lump eater is a very careful giant, the BFG said. Sophie was silent for a few moments. Then suddenly, in a voice filled with excitement, she cried out, I've got it! By golly, I think I've got it! Got what? Asked the BFG. The answer, cried Sophie. We'll go to the Queen. It's a terrific idea. If I went and told the Queen about these disgusting man-eating giants, I'm sure she'd do something about it. The BFG looked down at her sadly and shook his head. She is never believing you, he said. Never in a month of Mondays. Oh, I think she would. Never, the BFG said. It is sounding such a wonky tall story. The Queen will be laughing and saying, what awful rub squash. She would not. Of course she would, the BFG said. I has told you before that human beings is simply not believing in giants. Then it's up to us to find a way of making her believe in them, Sophie said. And how was you getting in to see the Queen anyway? The BFG asked. Now hold on a sec, Sophie said. Just you hold on a sec, because I've got another idea. Your ideas is full of grodswoggle, the BFG said. Not this one, Sophie said. You say that if we tell the Queen, she would never believe us. I is certain she wouldn't, the BFG said. But we aren't going to tell her, Sophie said excitedly. We don't have to tell her. We'll make her dream it. Well, that is an even more froth-bungling suggestion, the BFG said. Dreams is lots of fun, but nobody's believing in dreams either. You was only believing in a dream while you was actually dreaming it. But as soon as you was waking up, you was saying, oh, thank goodness that were only a dream. Don't you worry about that part of it, Sophie said. I can fix that. Never can you fix it, the BFG said. I can. I swear I can. But first of all, let me ask you a very important question. Here it is. Can you make a person dream absolutely anything in the world? Anything you like, the BFG said proudly. If I said I wanted to dream that I was in a flying bathtub with silver wings, could you make me dream it? I could, the BFG said. But how? Sophie said. You obviously don't have exactly that dream in your collection. I do not, the BFG said, but I can soon be mixing it up. How could you mix it up? Well, it's a little bit like mixing a cake, the BFG said. If you was putting the right amounts of all the different things into it, you was making the cake come out any way you want. Sugary, spongy, curranty, Christmassy, or grobswitchy. It's the same with dreams. Go on, Sophie said. Well, I has dillions of dreams on my shelf, right or left? Right, Sophie said. I has dreams about bathtubs, lots of them. I has dreams about silver wings. I has dreams about flying. So all I has to do is mix those dreams together in the proper way, and I is very quickly making a dream where you was flying in a bathtub with silver wings. I see what you mean, Sophie said. But I didn't know you could mix one dream with another. Oh, dreams like being mixed, the BFG answered. He's getting very lonesome all by themselves in those glassy bottles. Right, Sophie said. Now then, do you have dreams about the Queen of England? Lots of them, the BFG said. And about giants? Of course, the BFG said. And about giants eating people? Oh, swiggles of them, the BFG said. And about little girls like me? Oh, those is the commonest of all, the BFG said. Oh, there's bottles and bottles of dreams about little girls. And you could mix them all up just as I want you to, Sophie asked, getting more and more excited. Well, of course, the BFG said. But how is this helping us? I think you was barking up the wrong dog. Now, hold on, Sophie said. Listen carefully. I want you to mix a dream which you will blow into the Queen of England's bedroom when she is asleep, and this is how it will go. Now, hang on a minute, the BFG said. How was I possibly going to get near enough to the Queen of England's bedroom to blow in my dream? You was talking dumb silly. Oh, I'll tell you that later, Sophie said. For the moment, please listen carefully. Here is the dream I want you to mix. Are you paying attention? Very close, the BFG said. I want the Queen to dream that 9 disgusting giants, each one about 50 feet tall, are galloping to England in the night. She must dream their names as well. What are their names again? Flesh lump eater, the BFG said. Man hugger, bone cruncher, child chewer, meat dripper, gizzard gulper, maid masher, blood bottler, and the butcher boy. Well, let her dream all those names, Sophie said, and let her dream that they will be creeping into England in the depths of the witching hour and snatching little boys and girls from their beds. Let her dream that they will be reaching into the bedroom windows and pulling the little boys and girls out of their beds, and then... Sophie paused. Do they eat them on the spot, or do they carry them away first? She asked. Oh, they is usually just popping them straight into their mouths like popcorn, the BFG said. Well, put that in the dream, Sophie said. And then the dream must say that when their tummies are full, they will go galloping back to giant country where no one can find them. Was that all? The BFG said. Oh, certainly not, Sophie said. You must then explain to the Queen in her dream that there is a big friendly giant who can tell her where all those giants are living, so that she can send her soldiers and her armies to capture them once and for all. And now let her dream one last and very important thing. Let her dream that there is a little girl called Sophie sitting on her windowsill who will tell her where the big friendly giant is hiding. Where is I hiding? Asked the BFG. We'll come to that later, Sophie said. So the Queen dreams her dream, right? Right, the BFG said. Then she wakes up and the first thing she thinks is, oh, what a horrid dream. I'm so glad it was only a dream. And then she looks up from her pillow, and what does she see? Well, what does she see? The BFG asked. She sees a little girl called Sophie sitting on her windowsill, right there in real life before her eyes. Well, how is you going to be sitting on the Queen's windowsill, may I beg? The BFG said. Well, you are going to put me there, Sophie said. And that's the lovely part about it. If someone dreams that there is a little girl sitting on her windowsill, and then she wakes up and sees the little girl really is sitting there, that is a dream come true, is it not? I is beginning to see where you is driving to, the BFG said. If the Queen is knowing that part of the dream is true, then perhaps she is believing the rest is true. Well, that's about it, Sophie said, but I shall have to convince her of that myself. You said you was wanting the dream to say there is a big friendly giant who is also going to talk to the Queen. Absolutely, Sophie said. You must. You're the only one who can tell her where to find the other giants. Well, how is I meeting the Queen? Asked the BFG. I's not wanting to be shooted at by her soldiers. Oh, the soldiers are only in the front of the palace, Sophie said. At the back there's a huge garden, and there are no soldiers in there at all. There's a very high wall with spikes on it around the garden to stop people climbing in, but you could simply walk over that. How was you knowing all this about the Queen's palace? The BFG asked. Well, last year I was in a different orphanage, Sophie said. It was in London, and we used to go for walks all around. Is you helping me find this palace? The BFG asked. I has never dared go hide and sneaking around London in my life. Oh, I'll show you the way, Sophie said confidently. He's frightened of London, the BFG said. Don't be, Sophie said. It's full of tiny dark streets, and there are very few people around at the witching hour. The BFG picked Sophie up between one finger and thumb and placed her gently on the palm of the other hand. Is the Queen's palace very big? He asked. Huge, Sophie said. And how's we finding the right bedroom? Well, that's up to you, Sophie said. You're supposed to be an expert at that sort of thing. And you're absolutely sure the Queen will not be putting me in a zoo with those cattley piddlers? Of course she won't, Sophie cried. You'll be a hero. You'll never have to eat snozcumbers again. Sophie saw the BFG's eyes widen. He licked his lips. You mean it? He said. You really mean it? No more of those disgustive snozcumbers? You couldn't get one if you wanted to, Sophie said. Humans don't even grow them. That did it. The BFG got to his feet. Well, when is you wanting to mix this special dream, he asked. Now, Sophie said. At once. When is we going to see the Queen? He said. Tonight, Sophie said, as soon as you've mixed the dream. Tonight? The BFG cried. Why such a flush-bunking hurry? Well, if we can't save tonight's children, we can anyway save tomorrow's, Sophie said. What is more, I'm getting famished. I haven't had a thing to eat for 24 hours. Then we is better get crackling, the BFG said, moving back towards the cave. Sophie kissed him on the tip of his thumb. I knew you'd do it, she said. Come on, let's hurry. Next chapter, Mixing the Dream. It was dark now. The night had already begun. The BFG, with Sophie sitting on his hand, hurried into the cave and put on those brilliant, blinding lights that seemed to come from nowhere. He placed Sophie on the table. Stay there, please, he said, and no chittering. I is needing to listen only to silence when I is mixing up such a naughty, plexicated dream as this one. He hurried away from her. He got out an enormous empty glass jar that was the size of a washing machine. He clutched it to his chest and hurried toward the shelves on which stood the thousands and thousands of smaller jars containing the captured dreams. Dreams about giants, he muttered to himself as he searched the labels. The giants is guzzling human beings. No, not that one. No, nor that one. Ah, here's one. Oh, and here's the other. He grabbed the jars and unscrewed the tops. He tipped the dreams into the enormous jar he was clutching, and as each one went in, Sophie caught a glimpse of a small sea-green blob tumbling from one jar into another. The BFG hurried towards another shelf. Now, he muttered, I was wanting dreams about giggle houses for girls and about boxel boxes for boys. He was becoming very tense now. Sophie could almost see the excitement bubbling inside him as he scurried back and forth among his beloved jars. There must have been 50,000 dreams altogether up there on the shelves, but he seemed to know almost exactly where every one of them was. Dreams about a little girl, he muttered, and dreams about me, about the BFG. Come on, hurry up, keep on with it. Now where in the wonky world does I keep a nose? And so it went on. In about half an hour the BFG had found all the dreams he wanted and had tipped them into one huge jar. He put the jar on the table. Sophie sat watching him but said nothing. Inside the big jar, lying on the bottom of it, she could clearly see about 50 of those oval sea-green jelly shapes, all pulsing gently in and out, some lying on top of others, but each one still a quite separate individual dream. Now he is mixing 'em, the BFG announced. He went to the cupboard where he kept his bottles of Frobscottle, and from it he took out a gigantic egg beater. It was one of those that had a handle which you turn, and down below there are lots of overlapping blades that go whizzing around. He inserted the bottom end of his contraption into the big jar where the dreams were lying. Watch, he said. He started turning the handle very fast. Flashes of green and blue exploded inside the jar. The dreams were being whisked into a sea-green froth. Oh, the poor things, Sophie cried. Oh, they's not feeling it, the BFG said as he turned the handle. Dreams is not like human beings or animals. They has no brains. They is made of zosimus. After about a minute, the BFG stopped whisking. The whole bottle was now full to the brim with large bubbles. They were almost exactly like the bubbles we ourselves blow from soapy water, except that these had an even brighter and more beautiful colour swimming on their surface. Keep watching, the BFG said. Quite slowly, the topmost bubble rose up through the neck of the jar and floated away. A second one followed, then a third and fourth. Soon the cave was filled with hundreds of beautifully coloured bubbles, all drifting gently through the air. It was a truly wonderful sight. As Sophie watched them, they all started floating towards the cave entrance, which was still open. They're going out, Sophie whispered. Of course, the BFG said. Where to? Well, those are all the little tiny dream bits that I isn't using, the BFG said. They's going back to the misty country to join up with proper dreams. Oh, it's all a bit beyond me, Sophie said. Well, dreams is full of mystery and magic, the BFG said. Do not try to understand them. Look in the big bottle and you'll see that the dream that you is wanting for the Queen. Sophie turned and stared into the great jar. On the bottom of it, something was thrashing around wildly, bouncing up and down and flinging itself against the walls of the jar. Good heavens, she cried. Is that it? That's it, the BFG said proudly. But But it's horrible, Sophie cried. It's jumping about. It wants to get out. Well, that's because it's a troggle humper, the BFG said. It's a nightmare. Oh, but I don't want you to give the Queen a nightmare, Sophie cried. Well, if she is dreaming about giants guzzling up little boys and girls, then what is you expecting it to be except a nightmare, the BFG said. Oh no, Sophie cried. Oh yes, the BFG said. A dream where you is seeing little chidlers being eaten is about the most frightening-some troggle-humpering dream that you can get. It's a kicksy bog thumper. It's a wopsy grob switcher. It's all them riddled into one. It's as bad as that dream I blew into the flesh lump eater this afternoon. In fact, it's probably worse. Sophie stared down at the fearful nightmare dream that was still thrashing away in the huge glass jar. It was much larger than the others. It was about the size and shape of, shall we say, a turkey's egg? It was jellyish. It had tinges of bright scarlet deep inside. There was something terrible about the way it was throwing itself against the sides of the jar. Oh, I don't want to give the Queen a nightmare, Sophie said. I is thinking, BFG said, that your Queen will be happy to have a nightmare if having a nightmare is going to save a lot of human beings from being gobbled up by filthsome giants. Is I right or is I left? I suppose you're right, Sophie said. It's got to be done. She'll soon be getting over it, the BFG said. Have you put all the other important things into it? Sophie asked. When I is blowing that dream into the Queen's bedroom, the BFG said, she will be dreaming every single little thing-a-ling-a-ding you is asking me to make her dream. About me sitting on the windowsill? Well, that part is very strong. And about the big friendly giant? Well, he's putting in a nice long gobbet about him, the BFG said. As he spoke, he picked up one of his smaller jars and very quickly tipped the struggling, thrashing troggle humper out of the large jar into the smaller one. Then he screwed the lid tightly onto the small jar. That's it, he announced. We is now ready. He fetched his suitcase and put the small jar into it. Why bother to take a great big suitcase when you've only got one jar? Sophie said. You could put the jar in your pocket. The BFG looked down at her and smiled. By goggles, he said, taking the jar out of the suitcase. Your head is not quite so full of grim sludge after all. I can see you was not born last week. Thank you, kind sir, Sophie said, making a little curtsy from the tabletop. Is you ready to leave? The BFG asked. I'm ready, Sophie cried. Her heart was beginning to thump at the thought of what they were about to do. It really was a wild and crazy thing. Perhaps they would both get thrown into prison. The BFG was putting on his great black cloak. He tucked the jar into a pocket in his cloak. He picked up the long trumpet-like dream blower. Then he turned and looked at Sophie, who was still on the tabletop. The dream bottle is in my pocket, he said. Is you going to sit in there with it during the travel? Oh, never, cried Sophie. I refuse to sit next to that beastly thing. Then where is you going to sit? The BFG asked her. Sophie looked him over for a few moments. Then she said, well, if you would be kind enough to swivel one of your lovely big ears so that it is lying flat like a dish, that would make a very cosy place for me to sit. By gumbo, that's a squackling good idea, the BFG said. Slowly, he swiveled his huge right ear until it was like a great shell facing the heavens. He lifted Sophie up and placed her into it. The ear itself, which was about the size of a large tea tray, was full of the same channels and crinkles as a human ear. It was extremely comfortable. I hope I don't fall down your ear hole, Sophie said, edging away from the large hole just beside her. Be very careful not to do that, the BFG said. You'd be giving me a cronking earache. The nice thing about being there was that she could whisper directly into his ear. Oh, you was tickling me a bit, the BFG said. Please don't jiggle about so much. Oh, I'll try not to, Sophie said. Are we ready? Owie! Yelled the BFG. Don't do that. Oh, I didn't do anything, Sophie said. You were talking too loud. You was forgetting that I was hearing every little thing-a-ling-a-ding 50 times louder than usual. And there you is, shouting away right inside my ear. Oh, gosh, Sophie remembered. I forgot that. Your voice is sounding like thunder and trumpets. I'm so sorry, Sophie whispered. Is that better? No, cried the BFG. Sounds as though you was shooting off a blunderbuss. Then how can I talk to you? Sophie whispered. Don't, cried the poor BFG. Please don't. Each word is like dropping buzz bombs in my ear hole. Sophie tried speaking right under her breath. Is this better? She said. She spoke so softly she couldn't even hear her own voice. Well, that's a bit better, BFG said. Now, I is hearing you very nicely. What is you trying to say to me just now? I was saying, are we ready? We is off, cried the BFG, heading for the cave entrance. We is off to meet Her Magister the Queen. Outside the cave, he rolled the large round stone back into place and set off at a tremendous gallop. There we go, boys and girls. I hope you enjoyed that. Tell you what, why don't you try making your own dream? I'll put a link underneath here to a blank jar so you can fill it full of your own dreams. If you could have any dream in the world, what would you want to have in it? Okay, send them to me once you're done and we'll go through them and I'll show them on here. Okay, see you soon, boys and girls. Bye.